Hello everyone, and sorry. Hello everyone, and welcome to the Clownwise Communities Workshop Bushfire Simulation, featuring the sim table. So I'd like to welcome everyone to the East Killara focused workshop this evening. So before we get started anymore, I'd like to say that on behalf of Council, I recognise the traditional custodians of the land, past, present, and on whose land we stand. Ku-ring-gai Council is proud of its Aboriginal heritage and the culture. We especially recognise this in my welcome to you. So I'd like to introduce our presenters for the evening. We have Mark Schuster, our Bushfire Technical Officer,
Hello,
Dr.
everyone.
Jenny Scott, the Sustainability Project Leader from Council as well. We have Captain Andrew Wilson from the Killara RFS Brigade, and Adam Perry from the New South Wales Fire and Rescue. So a little bit of housekeeping for this evening. So we will just do our presentation, and then towards the end, you will have an opportunity to ask your questions. So as we proceed through the workshop, please put your questions into the Q&A box, which you should be able to see, I think, at the top of your screen. And if you have any technical issues, please put them into the chat box, which again is you should be able to access that from the top of your screen. Okay, so next, the workshop. Jenny, would you like to describe the Clownwise Communities Program?
Yeah, thanks, James. So Clownwise Communities is a program that Council developed about 10 years ago. It has developed further over the years, and we have a website now called climatewisecommunities.com.au, and you can go to that whenever you like and start doing your bushfire plan. We will have a new iteration of Climate-Wise Communities 2.0, hopefully in the next 12 months. And that should be even more comprehensive and have lots of bells and whistles that the current version doesn't have. So look forward to seeing that in the future. In the meantime, the way we run this program is to show you examples of extreme events in terms of bushfire. And then we show you how you can plan for these extreme events by working through the Climate-Wise Communities tools. So hopefully you will find that of interest and of use. And to date, we know from the feedback of many people who've done this workshop before that it has been of use quite extensively, not only in Australia, but also being used in the US as well. Thanks, James. Back to you. You're muted, James.
Sorry about that, Jenny. Okay, so before we proceed any further, you think I would be not avoid that little trap after all these years of doing Zoom meetings, but anyway. Okay, so before we proceed any further, I'd like to launch a short poll, a very short 10-question poll. This poll will, or survey, will basically get a picture of where you are at currently in your bushfire preparedness. It's a very simple poll, and I will guide you through the questions as you go through, just to help you get through the questions, because they can be a little bit tricky in terms of proceeding the way through. So I'll launch the poll now. It should appear on your screen round about now. So the first question is, do you live in bushfire prone land or the ember zone? Okay, so you tick one of the three, and if you're not sure, just tick the third box or button, unsure. So the other one, the second question, have you experienced a bushfire before? Again, tick either yes or no. Question 3, do you have a bushfire survival plan? Again, no judgment here, just tick if you do, yes, or if you don't, no. And if you don't, well, that's what you're here for. We'll help you do that. So question 4, this relates to the previous question. If you do not have a poll, if you don't have a bushfire survival plan, what do you think is holding you back? You can click more than one answer, but if you have a plan, just tick NA, I have a plan. And again, tick anything that relates to you. Now, question 5, if you scroll down, where do you keep your plan? If you've answered no in question 3, tick NA. And then scroll down to the next question, 6. And if you do have a plan, just tick the box which relates to you. So question 6, if you do have a plan, how confident are you that it will work in a major bushfire? And again, brutal honesty is perfect. It helps you get to a point where you can actually make a better plan. So if you're not confident at all, that's fine. That's a great answer, because at least then you can improve it. Question 7 is your plan A, stay and defend, or leave early? And then question 8, have you modified your house to improve its resilience to bushfires, storms, heat waves, and what have you done? And just tick whatever relates to you, that's fine. And question 9, how well do you know your neighborhood? Again, tick whatever relates to you the most. And question 10, what prompted you to attend the workshop? Is it the letter, the flyer, or both? Did you find out about the workshop via the Ku-ring-gai Loving Living Facebook page, or the community e-news, or even the banner? We put up 2 banners around the area as well. So if you saw those, and let us know if that was a good prompt for you to join the workshop. Okay, so we have about 16 or so people who answered the survey out of 44. So we'll give it an extra few minutes to give people a chance to put their answers in. And the reason why we do these surveys before the workshop is just to get an idea of where you are at in terms of your bushfire planning and preparedness, so that we can compare it with a survey that we will run a few months down the line, that will help capture where you are, how far you've progressed along the line of making a bushfire preparedness plan. Because we'd like to know how well our program's working. So by capturing by doing these surveys, we know if we're doing a good job or not. Okay, so the survey's been running for about, say, close to 4 minutes now. So that should be plenty of time to get the answers from everyone who wants to answer. So I'll end the poll now. So thank you very much for everyone who answered that poll. Okay, so the next step is I'll just introduce to everyone what the sim table is and what they'll be seeing. So I'll share my screen. Okay, so the sim table, Jenny, would you like to introduce the sim table to the participants?
Sure. The sim table is something that Council imported from America 2.5 years ago, so that we can show people how bushfire behaves in the landscape. Now, it does projections of actual fires that have occurred in the past, and it also allows us to run simulations of fires that potentially could occur in the future. So when you actually see the physical sim table, it is a tray filled with crushed walnut shell, and we can put an orthographic map over the top that shows you all the contours, and we can shape up the walnut shell into the valleys and hills and plateaus, etc. And then loaded into that is a bushfire program that has the vegetation type of the area that we're looking at. It has the ability to vary the weather, so in terms of humidity and temperature and wind direction. And you'll see when we bring up the simulation, or you can see it now on the top left corner, there's a blue circle, and that is a wind direction arrow and a wind speed arrow. So we can make it typically like a catastrophic fire day where we have very low humidity, very dry vegetation, very flammable, and we can ignite a simulated fire and we can let it burn and watch how the weather and the geography and the vegetation affects the way that fire progresses. And it really does give you a very good idea of why it is so difficult to sometimes give adequate advanced warning, because these fires can behave in such unpredictable ways and can change in the blink of an eye. And so getting the message out to people in that real time is getting that whole system is improving immensely, but it will still be on certain occasions a lag phase. And so we show you the kind of fire that you need to prepare for, and we'll run a simulation of an extreme event in Ku-ring-gai so you can see what it would look like locally. But in the meantime, James is going to show you what a local extreme event looked like from the Black Summer period. And this is the Gosper Mountain fire that occurred up in the Blue Mountains. James spent a long time with SimTable in America, downloading all the data from the satellites and creating this projection, because it's an historic fire. So when you see the footprint of this fire, it is as it did occur. It's the speed. We speed it up so we don't have to sit here for 44 days to watch it, but you can see it move across the landscape and how sometimes it just explodes and other times it just grumbles along. So what we hope to do in the future, we haven't got it yet, is to marry that up to the weather conditions at the time, so we can show you graphically how the weather affected the progression of that fire. But this is to date still the biggest fire in New South Wales history. So James, over to you.
Thank you very much, Jenny. Before I start off, I'd like to also call people's attention to the bottom of the screen where they can see the date. It's in the American format. So it's the you'll see that the fire starts on the 26th of October 2019, but the date shows the 10th 26th 2019. So just bear that in mind, and keep an eye on that day, that time, and that's that will show you the progression as the fire moves through time. So I'm sure everyone's familiar with the Gospers Mountain fire. It was at the time, and maybe still is, the biggest fire to hit Australia, or definitely at least New South Wales. And this fire started in the middle during the Black Summer period. There was many fires all throughout Queensland, New South Wales, and Victoria. And this was after on the back of years of severe drought, where you had the entire state of New South Wales in drought. Soil moisture was at record lows. We had record temperatures, and it was just quite a harsh and unforgiving environment when this fire broke out. The fire started on the 26th of October by a lightning strike, right near the Gospers Mountain area. And as you should be able to see, it was named the Gospers Mountain Fire because Gospers Mountain was just close by. So in 2.5 hours after the start of the fire, the fire burnt 65 hectares. High winds meant helicopters could not fly, and the helicopters, that meant that the RFS raft team could not be inserted to address that fire in a timely manner. So after the fire started, it moved very quickly, and over the next day, it burnt up to 500 hectares. So it was already a very fast-moving fire by that stage. So during this period, as we mentioned, there was fires all over New South Wales, Queensland, and Victoria. The RFS and New South Wales Fire and Rescue were already stretched to the limit, stretched very thinly, attacking fires throughout the area. Now, if we speed the fire up to the 5th of November, a bit of rain hit the area, and that kind of calmed everything down. So it put the fire to bed, it really calmed things down, and everyone thought that we might have been out of the danger zone. However, as you'll see, and as you know, that wasn't the case. So I'll zoom out a bit to give everyone a bit of perspective here. It's already moving very fast, and it's taking over quite a large area of the World Heritage National Park area. So again, I'll just speed things up a little bit. And Andrew, seeing as you were at the fire, feel free to chip in at any point about your experience of the fire as well. But I believe that comes a little bit later on towards Wiseman's Ferry. Is that right?
Yep, that's right. At this stage, it was just one of many fires going throughout New South Wales. I had some involvement in it, but we can cover some of that off a bit later when it gets larger.
Mm-hmm. And Adam, I believe you volunteer with RFS as well. Were you involved in the Gosford Mountain fire at all? That's for Adam.
Sorry, James. Yes, I did a couple of days up. Once joined with the 3 Mile Creek fire up into Pete's Ridge with fire rescue, but I didn't go up there with the RFS at that time.
I see. Okay, understood. Okay, so the fire is moving along. It's covering up quite a big area. So I'll speed things up just to get to the other points in the fire a lot faster. And I'll zoom out again to give you everyone a bit more context of as to how big the fire is and the area that will eventually be consumed by flame. So I'll speed things up a little bit more. So at this point, the fire is still moving quite fast, but in the grand scheme of things, it wasn't moving that fast. And you'll see it actually speeds up even more. So it's coming up to the 5th, and at this point in time, the rain calmed things down a bit. But then on the 7th, it took one of its first big runs. As you see down to your, it'll take a big run down to the southwest. And at this point, the fire is so big, nothing much could stop it. And as we approach the 12th of November, we'll see that things get a lot more extreme, and the fire behavior really ramps up at that point. So there you go. There you have it. You have the beginning of a very big fire run to the southwest. I'll zoom out a bit to give you an idea of how big it is. So as you can see, this was a very fast moving fire. So now at this point, the fire is 56,000 hectares. So at various stages, the fire was creating its own weather and was moving both north and south at the same time. So as we speed things up, again, around about the 24th of November was when there was a bit of storm activity. I'll slow things down again. So this is the 24th of November, and as I mentioned, there was a bit of storm activity in the area, and that led to a series of lightning strikes throughout the area, sparking new fires around. But that will come up a little bit later. Around about this time was also when a microburst tore through the North Shore area. So if everyone could throw their mind back to 2019, there was a big storm that trashed, I think, Gordon and Pymble, pulled down lots of trees and caused some blackouts and destroyed a lot of cars. The same storm activity or period of storm activity started these fires you can see in the northeast of your screen now. So these storms, these lightning strikes cause the start of the Little L complex, the Thompson's Creek fire, and the 3 Mile Creek fire as well. So as we progress into December, things calm down again. Now a backburn, there was some backburning preparations being planned in around this time. However, that had to be abandoned because there were people swimming in the Colo River, which I imagine was very unhelpful for preparations for this fire. And as you can see, just keep an eye out to the north. There's another fire's broken out, and then another fire's broken out to the southeast area there. and there's more spot fires appearing to the south as well, which have now just been consumed by the main fire front. And down to the to the southeast is also the Wiseman's Ferry area. So Andrew, would you like to chime in as to what's happening at this point in time?
Yeah, sure. I might just go back a bit. If you look at where this fire had actually started, and remembering that in our part of Australia, the dangerous winds that are associated with high fire danger come from the northwest. And if you look at in relation to where this fire started, obviously you can see that what has happened is with that general influence, this fire's moved to the east towards Gosford and moved south, all under that wind from the northwest. The date we've got on here at the moment, down the bottom there, is the 7th of December, but my involvement with this one started on the 12th of November, or in fact, the 14th of November. And the reason I remember that is the 12th of November, we had the fires down at the bottom of Kissing Point Road in South Turramurra. So I'm sure most of you would recall that, if only through the large tanker dropping a whole lot of pink gel all over the house roofs and everything in that vicinity as we were looking after that fire. But I remember 2 days after that, we all got called up to a briefing at the Glenorrey Rural Fire Brigade Station, just south of the Wiseman's Ferry River, and we were told that the key objective on this Gospers Mountain fire, which had been going for some weeks by that stage, but which hadn't really been getting our attention, the key objective was to stop it crossing the Hawkesbury River. The concern was obviously that if it jumped that Hawkesbury River, it would come straight down towards the south of this picture we've got here, and into the Hornsby Shire and across towards the Northern Beaches area. So that would have been putting quite a lot of urban area in the line of danger there. So from that point on, around the middle of November, we were sending a lot of people up every day and every night towards this Gospers Mountain area and places like Wiseman's Ferry and further north to do a lot of backburning with the objective of trying to get a containment edge around this fire and stop it, as I say, jumping the Hawkesbury River.
Okay, and what I'll do now...
that went on for several months. In reality, it went on from the middle of, for us on the North Shore, and indeed other areas, but that was the concern. So that went on from the middle of November right up until essentially the end of December, I think, maybe a little bit more, but a good 6 weeks of real commitment.
Great. And Adam, what were you doing at this point in time as well?
So I would have been in between shifts. So I'm normally based at Crow's Nest Fire Station, so I'm doing my normal shifts as they roll around, and on my days off, I availed myself to assist in going out on strike teams. So during that time, I spent a number of days and into evenings on strike teams. We went up on a night shift strike team to Wiseman's Ferry and went up into the back there and tried to, we did a lot of work around a number of properties up there which contained and made those properties safe. But as Andrew said, there were many hours put in over the extended period throughout this particular area, and the aim was to maintain it so that it stayed north of the river. And my personal RFS brigade spent a lot of time up there with the other RFS resources as well.
Okay, great. And I'd imagine that this period was quite an intense period, and the fire itself was a bit of a beast, I'd imagine. And as everyone can see now, that while we've been talking, all the other fires, the 3 Mile, the Little L Complex, the Thompson's Creek and 3 Mile Creek fire has all kind of started to join, which is now forming the what's known as the Megafire. So it's quite a massive fire at this point. So one of the main issues here was that, as we discussed already, is the embers starting to move ahead of the fire front. And I think in this case, embers were traveling up to 20 kilometers ahead of the fire front, I believe. So as we speed things up again, because I slowed them down, just so it gives some time to have a conversation, you'll look to the southwest of the fire, and you'll see that the fire is progressing towards the Lithgow area. So that area was also going to be the next area to be heavily impacted. And then just south around the Great Western Highway, you've seen the fires erupted there. That was caused by a unpredicted weather change that led to a hazard reduction burn get out of control. This fire later on was known as the Gross Valley fire, and this particular fire caused a lot of damage around the the Bellsliner Road area. So as this fire, as we progressed to the 21st of December. Fire crews were trying to, well, as we discussed already, just trying to stop the fire from jumping the Hawkesbury River, and that was a real concern, because this fire, the Gospers Mountain fire, was apparently only 1 day away from reaching the North Shore. Had the conditions been right, it could have easily jumped the river and burnt its way towards Hornsby and Ku-ring-gai. So we'll just let this fire run a little bit more. The fire, in this simulation or progression, the fire ends around about the early days of January. However, in reality, the fire actually kept on going for until I think early February, where it was finally put out by 3 days worth of rain, which filled Warragamba Dam from being, I think, 40% full to 90% full. So I think we'll pause it here because nothing else of major significance happened. So what I like to do for these workshops featuring the Gospers Mountain Fire is to zoom out a little bit and give people a bit of a view as to how big this particular fire was in the scale of New South Wales. So that was an absolutely enormous fire. It covered a huge area, and that was just one fire. There was another very large fire to the south of the Great Western Highway, and there were fires all throughout the north and south of New South Wales, leading into Victoria and Queensland. So that's just one fire, and we must not forget all the other fires that were going on at the same time. And this context, I'd like to paint the picture for you with. You should keep this in mind for when we go to the next scenario where we discuss or show a fire in your local area. And keep in mind what resources might be available to you in terms of RFS and fire rescue in the context of having fires all the way up through the north and south of New South Wales, Victoria and Queensland. Okay, Jenny, should we pass over to you now?
Sure, thanks, James. So having seen that as a fire that was very close to Ku-ring-gai, the fire scientists, and I'm sure both Andrew and Adam would agree, there is nothing preventing a fire of a similar scale impacting Ku-ring-gai at some point in the future. So the lesson to take away from that progression is that it can occur. You can see how quickly the fire can move from time to time. You can see how it just slows right down at certain points and then just takes those massive runs, depending on the weather conditions. And it went for a long period of time, which means it's not just over and done with in 24, 48 hours, as has happened sometimes in the past. This could be hanging around and going to impact areas for weeks on end. So they are very difficult to extinguish in those extreme weather conditions because it is so dry, the fire can continue on in the landscape for quite some time. And as James pointed out, there may not be the resources available to fight the fire as well as we might have if it was the only fire that RFS and Fire and Rescue had to deal with. So events like Black Summer have every chance of happening again, and that's what we want to prepare for. So we're going to switch over now to a view of Ku-ring-gai. And we're going to run a similar kind of fire, and that could potentially happen in Ku-ring-gai at some point. Now, bear in mind, this particular fire that we're going to do today is just one of 1,000 different variations that could happen. We're just choosing one type of fire to simulate. We can't be at all sure that this is how the fire will occur, or for that matter, even if it will impact the areas that we look at tonight. So just coming in here, we've got this focus on East Killara. Mark, would you like to talk about the local area? You know it very well.
Yeah, actually, I live at St Ives Showground, but I often go dipping down in that area to do my fire sampling, where one of my jobs in council is to estimate the fuel loadings at various spots. So I do a lot of walking, particularly down that pipeline track and to the north and south of that in beautiful Middle Harbour. Often the fuel loadings come in at what we would term in overall fuel loadings as very high to extreme, and that can be up to about 35 tonnes a hectare. Pretty heavy fuel loads that are sitting there. Now, the interesting thing is that there have been a number of prescribed burns, particularly by National Parks and Wildlife in there in the last 10 years. But what is really evident is that even after 3 to 4 years, those fuel loads have built up again to the extent where it could carry a pretty significant wildfire, given the right or the wrong conditions, I should say. And it's got very steep topography, as many of you who might do bushwalking over the edge of Eastern Killara and East Lindfield would realise. Some really beautiful areas in there. But it's really an area where significant fire runs have happened. If you look at some of the old tree scars in there, there've been some pretty intense fires, even past 50 years back. No real recent wildfires in there, but that's no cause for celebration, because there have been some pretty big fires in the past. That steep topography means a fire can travel up from the base of the valley so quickly, and there'll be wind-driven fires. Firefighters have to be careful, because a flank fire or on the side of a fire with a wind shift can become an actual head fire very quickly and rapidly in steep terrain. So there's all these factors to consider. And the large interface you can see on the maps James has there. The interface between the urban and the bushland is very extensive around Eastern St Ives, right down south to East Lindfield. So a large interface of bush right up against houses, and that isn't often a good mix, even though it's so beautiful. Thanks for that. I can tell you more after. Thanks.
Thanks, Mark. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to simulate a fire, and we're going to talk to the fire in the way that we'll stop it on occasion, and we'll ask you to think about what it is that you might be doing at that point in time. And we'll have a look at the Climate-Wise Communities tools to help you make decisions about what you might be doing at various stages of this fire. We'll also get Andrew and Adam to tell us what their organisations will be doing at various points in the fire, and how you can see that council, RFS, fire and rescue, SES, the police, they're all doing something before, during and after these events. So it is really critical, given the number of properties on the interface in Ku-ring-gai, that you have a very clear plan for what you will be doing. Because in those large scale events, and I think Andrew would support me wholeheartedly on this, there is no guarantee that there will be an RFS brigade in your area. Can you confirm that, Andrew?
Yes, that's right. Obviously, if there's not a lot of activity elsewhere, we'd hope there's quite a lot of resource available in our district on a high fire danger or even more challenging day. So that would be ideal. If something did start, we would be able to send a lot of trucks along with fire and rescue and a lot of crew. But that just may not be the case, particularly over that poor fire season of 2019, 2020. We had people literally from one end of the state to the other progressively, but a lot of out of area deployments that we were sent on, and that just indicates how the resources were used across the state, but also how stretched it all became. So there's no guarantee, but obviously all these organisations would do their best.
Yes, right. Thank you. So this is what we want you to plan for. We want you to plan for the worst case scenario, and imagine that it's unfolding in your area. And if you plan for that scale of an event, then anything less than that should be all the more manageable for you. So being prepared to be on your own, being prepared to make the right decisions at the right time is critical in this assessment of your risk and planning what you will do. So what we're going to do is zoom out just a little bit, and James is going to play God and start a fire. Somewhere to the north, we'll say that it's a day, probably a Tuesday, let's say, and it might be a lightning strike, it might be a traffic accident, it could be power lines down. There's a whole range of reasons why a fire might start at that point. And we can see now the fire is ignited. Now, lots of people would be able to see this fire. There would be a lot of smoke. So at this point, Andrew, what would RFS be doing?
Well, if this is a day where the fire danger is severe or extreme or even catastrophic, we'd have some pre-planning. We'd have some level of having resourced up in conjunction with fire rescue. But essentially, if a fire does start in that location at that time, we're going to send trucks and crew to that location as soon as the reports are received. And essentially what we're going to do is figure out exactly where it is, look at where it's heading and what is the immediate risk. And our role essentially, particularly on those high fire danger days, is going to be making sure that with that evaluation, warnings can be sent to the public who are in the area. And our prime objectives become keeping people out of the way, followed by property protection. The important point is we're not going to go charging into the bush to try and put that fire out, particularly in those sort of conditions. It's just too dangerous, and it's not really something that we're ever going to be successful in doing. So on those sort of days, it becomes a matter of safety of the public, followed by property protection, particularly in that interface area. You can see there where the fire is starting to reach up towards the back of the houses and those streets there. That's where we'll be stationed, and we'll be looking to protect those houses as best we can once we've done our public warnings and that sort of thing.
Okay, thank you. And Adam, what would fire and rescue be up to?
So along with the relevant resources, because that from the RFS, we would be responding multiple trucks depending on what the availability is and what else was going on that particular day. As Andrew mentioned, we would be standing up and doing our best to forward plan with the RFS on those days of high fire danger into extreme. The control centres would be stood up with fire rescue input within those Rural Fire Service control centres, and they'd be forward planning and making educated decisions on where to send more trucks and request more resources.
Great, thank you.
Yep, and you can actually see already how the first trucks on scene where that fire, or just at the end of that street where that fire would have started, would have hopefully formed a view pretty quickly that with the wind coming from pretty much the north, that embers would be carried towards the south. And as you've seen there, the real risk, the real danger areas are those ones on this other side of Middle Harbour Creek, where embers have got into the bottom of that valley and have raced up the hill as a fire pretty quickly, far quicker than it's spreading where it originally started.
Right, thank you. Okay, we'll just pause the fire there because James can play God in this instance. And we'll have a quick look at the Climate-Wise communities. So just bear in mind where we are with that fire. We'll come back to it shortly. So this is the Climate-Wise communities website. Now, if you scroll down the page when you go in, you can start your ready check. And it's got 5 steps. So we'll just do a quick Cook's tour through the first step. So that's just a disclaimer, the normal thing. And the first thing it asks you to do is to map your location. So you can put in your address and it will bring up an outline of your property. So I'll just put in a random address and we'll scroll down a little bit. And there you'll see the property is outlined and those colours represent particular hazards that property might be exposed to. So you have the bushfire prone lands in the red, you have the blue is flood areas, and the yellow is ember attack areas. So you can see most of Ku-ring-gai would be potentially subject to ember attack given the distance that those embers can travel. And if you scroll down a little further, James, you'll see there's a little tick the box showing you which hazards you need to plan for. Now, you may just be interested in the first instance of planning for bushfire and ember attack. That's fine. Or you might want to look at the opportunities to also address the other risks that your property might be exposed to. And every property in Ku-ring-gai is exposed to storm and heat wave. Interestingly, when you bring all these hazards together, there are certain strategies you can do that will help build resilience to all of those. So you can look at that cost-benefit analysis to see where you might best invest your money, depending on the level of risk that you have. So when you've done that, you can save that as a PDF to your computer. Council doesn't want to know your information, so it doesn't save any of this. So it is only saved if you click to a PDF. We'll just quickly have a look at step 2 before we go back to the fire. So you know what your risks are from step 1. Now, step 2 looks at your personal situation. Now, much of the research that sits behind this tool was done by the Bushfire CRC and RMIT after Black Saturday. And a lot of these questions refer to issues that people found of major significance to how their bushfire plan unfolded and how effective it was. So it's just a number of tick the boxes. So we'll scroll down and you can see it looks at whether you live alone or with other people, and whatever you tick, it will give you a hint of why you need to consider that in your bushfire plan. If it's in green, it's something that is positive that will help you in the fire situation. Or if it's red, it's something that could be a higher level of risk and that you will need to plan for should that circumstance be typical of your household. So it goes down and looks at a whole range of issues associated with your health and your ability to stay and defend. So in some cases, people may have health issues where stay and defend is quite unwise to do. And so you need to factor that into your trigger to leave early. So people need to think about all these issues to set their trigger about when they leave. And of course, if it's an extreme weather day that is forecast, what we encourage people to do is to actually leave home before there's an outbreak of any fire, spend the day in some nice air-conditioned environment, you know, council's library or the shopping centre, and go home of an evening if it appears to be all clear and safe. And we'll show you also about how you can prepare your house for that leave early. And again, if you do decide to stay and defend, some of the things you need to consider around your property. There's also about understanding some information about your neighbours, whether you have your own transport, whether you're going to rely on other people, whether your household is proficient in English and understands those messages that might come out from RFS on their Fires Near Me app, or whether your neighbours might need a little help interpreting that message. Your home ownership makes a difference because you're able to do a lot more to the house if you own it than if it's a rental and you have to negotiate things with the landlord. And also about the phone connection, because some of these major events, the phone towers go down, so you have no mobile phone connection. The power goes out, so you have no internet connection. And often all you're left with is a radio, either a battery powered radio, for example, or perhaps your car radio. And of course, you would tune to 702 in ABC in Sydney, which is the emergency broadcaster. So Adam or Andrew, do you want to add anything to that? Nope, all good? Brilliant.
Yep, all good.
Okay. So again, you save that to a PDF and we then are ready for step 3. But before we look at step 3, we'll go back and have a look at how that fire progresses. So we'll just switch back to our view of Ku-ring-gai. We have it on hold, so we'll let it run again. Remembering the weather conditions here, very low humidity, very high temperatures. And you can see James has varied the wind speed, and he'll pick it up now because the fire's been burning for quite some time. And we'll say the winds are blowing up to 90 kilometres an hour now from the north and northwest. So we look at how the fire starts to react to those higher wind speeds. And you can see there is quite a substantial fire front forming. It is moving toward the urban areas of the south. And again, it is spotting as the fire comes up to the ridge tops. The fire then spots across deeper into those urban areas. Mark, what would council be doing at this point?
We'd have our emergency management team certainly up. We'd be communicating with both Fire and Rescue, New South Wales Fire and Rescue, RFS and the police, particularly with regards to whether evacuation routes are viable, which routes would be best for evacuation, also where is the nearest neighbourhood safer place to put people who have evacuated and need to evacuate. Police would be very proactive, either looking for evacuation routes and which people they'd be actually door knocking, trying to get people out. The only issue is it's happened so swiftly, so time is against us. So yeah, council would be extremely proactive on the emergency management side, and we do have our team for that. So
Right.
we're coordinating with everyone.
Great. Thanks, Mark. Andrew, what's RFS up to now?
Yes, well, you can see how large this has become and how different spots have created different fires, and whilst they'll all join up, it's actually quite challenging because it is in several parts as we look at the moment. Our priorities remain warning messages to the public. So obviously Fires Near Me app will contain up-to-date information about this. I'd say this would be at a point where we're sending out text messages to people who are in the vicinity of certain mobile phone towers to say that there's a major fire right in their area about to impact them. And in some cases, it's probably too late for them to leave, need to shelter in place. So key priority for us is, as I say, keeping the public out of the way through those warnings. Fire trucks in the area will be trying to undertake property protection in those areas of interface, but it looks like, as you can see, around the middle of that fire, too late for some of that to be successful even. So whilst that will remain the other priority, It's because it's so scattered, you know, on both a western side in East Killara and also across in the Davidson area. That's going to be quite challenging, and there certainly would be unlikely to have a truck at every sort of house. There'll be trucks in some of those streets, but the impact that they'd be able to have with a fire of this magnitude is pretty limited. So it remains public messaging and doing our best to make sure that people, to the extent they can, with a shelter in place or make an exit to one of those neighborhood safer places. But essentially at this point in time, there's not a lot direct attack we can undertake on this fire.
Thank you, Andrew. And Adam, I imagine fire and rescue would be doing something similar?
Yes, we've been sending as many resources as we possibly could to the area, but as Andrew said, it comes down to what trucks are currently on the ground there. And they would be doing the best they can to save life in the first instance. Takes me back to the Springwood fires, which impacted into Yellow Rock. And I was talking to one of the deputy captains that was in charge of one of the trucks, and they were just doing structural triage. They were evacuating people out of houses into their fire truck to get them out of the area, and basically it was a case of structural triage, which is very unfortunate to discuss, but you've got to look at what you can save and what you can't save, and a well-prepared home is something that you can save.
Sure. Thank you, Adam. All right. Now, hopefully the message is coming through loud and clear. You should have left early. If you leave it too late to leave, then you may not have an exit route to get out. If too many people leave it too late to leave, then you could strike traffic congestion. Now, the ideal scenario is that we don't have traffic congestion because people have already left. Okay, so big message here to take home. Don't leave it too late to leave. Leave early. All right, we'll move on to step 3 of Climate-Wise communities while that fire takes a breather. And this one is looking at your property and what it is about your property that is an asset in terms of fire or potentially a risk. It makes the situation worse for you in terms of fire. So what we do is we just draw a bit of a mud map of the property. We mark where the trees are. Things like conifers, for example, make ideal wicks to transfer fire deeper into the property. Wooden decks, furniture on decks, vegetation, particularly mulch up against the walls, etc., all increase the risk. And in this case, the people have a pool. So if they have a firefighting pump, that water could be used by RFS to help defend that property. Andrew, at this point, RFS might have to make some difficult decisions about which properties to try and save. What do they base their decision on?
Yes, well, that's the structural triage that Adam was mentioning, and essentially that is looking at a group of houses in a street and unfortunately realizing that some just aren't worth saving, aren't savable, but others are, and it's going to be the ones that are clear of vegetation, well prepared, and those sorts of, with those sort of attributes, that are going to be the ones that are more likely to be savable, and therefore that's where the resources are going to be put. And it is a case that some houses which aren't clear of the bush or aren't particularly tidy in terms of vegetation, overgrown, a lot of rubbish around, that sort of thing, inaccessible, they're going to be ones that there's not really going to be any realistic chance or less of a chance that we're going to be able to do anything useful there. So it does come down to priorities and making decisions around putting our resources into those ones that are better prepared and with more likely chance of being saved.
Thank you. And Adam, do you have anything to add to that?
No, not at the moment. I'm just arriving home from my day, so I will chime in
no
when I can.
worries. No worries. Thanks, Adam. Okay, so now you can see that all the hazards that we talked about earlier, you can plan for each one separately. But we'll go to bushfire because that's why we're here tonight. Now it looks at every aspect of your property and looks at whether or not it's a strength or a weakness. So you can see the first thing we look at is the type of roof you have and the type of material that the roof is made from. So it's the house roof and design, and whether or not it's got lots of little corners and nooks and crannies where vegetation can get caught, leaves, and embers might set that vegetation alight, setting your roof space alight. So some of the older brick and tile homes can be quite porous, and embers can penetrate into those homes quite easily, particularly in high winds where the tiles actually get lifted slightly in the wind gusts, or perhaps the mortar around the ridge capping isn't as sound as it once was. That's another entry point. So it looks at all these different aspects, and if it's something that's red, then it's a risk. And if it's green or blue, then it's something that potentially is less of a risk. Remember, in these extreme events, no house is guaranteed safe. So every house can burn in a catastrophic fire like the one we're looking at. But if you want to give your house the best chance, then these are some of the things you might consider. Because ideally what we want you to do is leave your property very well prepared. So RFS and fire and rescue do have a good chance of defending it. And you're happy to leave early because you know that house has got a good chance of being still standing when you go back, even though it wasn't necessarily defended. So as we scroll further down, there's a whole range of different aspects to your home that you can look at. So eaves and fascia boards are another particularly vulnerable point. Vents and weep holes and chimneys are surprisingly good at allowing embers in. And there are ways you can deal with that. So shutters and, gutters and windpipe, downpipes. I'm trying to read. Little James. Gutters and downpipes, of course, are something that needs to be considered. Again, the wall, the material, the condition that the walls are in, whether they're timber, whether they're coated in paint, and what is the condition of the paintwork. So windows and the frames around the windows, of course, aluminium frames, far more robust than timber frames, but also it's how well sealed they are around the frames. And the windows that are facing the bush, whether the glass is a tempered glass that will resist the heat, even better would be to have double glazing on those sides. And there are resources you can go and have a look at. You'll see links appear at the bottom of some of these sections where you can go to a website. I think in this particular one with the windows, it's the Windows Association, where they have information on the type of glass that withstands the heat. Also, we have links to the Bushfire Building Council that have lots of hints about different aspects of houses and how you might make it more resilient. Again, garage doors are another place where embers can get in quite easily. The floor space and the subfloor space, particularly if you store materials under your floor, and how flammable those materials might be. Verandas and decking is a big one, particularly if those are older type of decks and verandas, which are quite dry and porous and quite easy to ignite. So there are decking materials available now that are much more fire resistant, and obviously replacing decks with those type of materials can be a benefit. It's also about what you keep on your deck and your verandas in the way of perhaps outdoor furniture or a gas barbecue, etc. And what are you going to do with them when the fire is threatening? So we scroll on down, and it also looks at the landscaping and the exterior of the house as well, and the type of plants that you have. Some plants are more fire resistant than others. And depending how you've got your landscaping configured, your trees can actually be a benefit to limiting the ember attack. In terms of actual fire ignition, if you've just got a single tree and it's an isolated canopy that has no connection to the bush, it may not be so much of a risk. Mark, would you like to comment on that?
Yeah, I would actually. And now I've got a little thing on the web, on YouTube actually, called Trees and Bushfire. If you put in Ku-ring-gai trees and bushfire, it should come up. That tells you all about the connectivity, both vertically and horizontally, how you can space trees. So, and actually things people say to me, are there trees that will stop embers? And yes, there's liquid ambers. Foreign liquid amber is actually a very good tree at stopping embers. So rather than taking out trees, sometimes trees can be great to stop embers spreading further. But a single tree by itself in an asset protection zone probably is of very little risk. If you've got clumps and clumps of trees together, that's when you get the risk starting, when trees become a forest. So isolated trees are often less of a risk. So yeah, there's that nice little 50-minute thing I did on trees and bushfire. But there's lots of CFA Victoria, Country Fire Authority, has some excellent ideas about landscaping and trees, the level of trees you can maintain. Thanks.
Thanks, Mark. Okay, and scrolling down, we look at water supply, what you might be able to leave available for RFS and fire and rescue if they come to your property. You can actually get a sticker or a plate to put on your front gate, the SWS sign, which stands for static water supply. That tells the fire agencies that there is water available on the property. It might be a water tank dedicated to firefighting. So you can put that on your gate and they'll know there is that resource there available to them. Fences and gates, of course, can also act as conduits for flame up to the house. And it looks at various other aspects, air conditioners, etc. So if you work your way through this step, it's quite a comprehensive step, you'll get a pretty good idea whether your property is vulnerable or whether it's got a few things about it that might help the defense of it. Now, whether you decide to stay and defend, you really need to understand all these aspects extremely well, because you don't want to be trying to defend a property that is pretty much undefendable, as Andrew said. And in that case, you really want to make sure your insurance is well up to date, and it also includes a added top-up amount if you intend to build back in that same location. You will be required to meet the bushfire attack levels building requirements. Mark, you know about that.
Yep, it's called BEL, or bushfire attack level, and there's different BEL ratings, from a BEL low, which is very low bushfire impact, up to a BEL flame zone, which is over 40 kilowatts per square metre, which is a really intense flame intensity. So you don't want to be in a BEL flame zone area, even in a house in a bushfire. BEL 29 is about the medium standard. If a lot of houses along our interface could achieve BEL 29 or 29 kilowatts per square metre, which is still very intense, it would be great if we could ever get to that level by retrofitting older houses, or certainly for construction of new houses, will need to be between bell 29 and bell 40 as a minimum, particularly along the interface. Thanks.
Thanks, Mark. Okay, so that's the end of that step. So we'll go back to the fire. We'll let it continue. Now you can see it's a pretty substantial footprint at this point. Now, sometimes what happens on days, hot summer periods like this, we can get a southerly change. So we're going to get James to swing that wind around to a southerly. Now you can see in certain areas the fire appears to be out. In other areas, in the face of the fire, the front of the fire is still burning. And you can see they're mostly down to the south there. So in some cases, when the wind changes, it'll turn the fire back on itself. But in other cases, it creates whole new areas under threat. So Adam, what happens now with RFS? Andrew, I'm sorry.
Yes, well, the risk here is if we're in certain streets there, which look like the fire has already gone overhead and is heading away from us, then obviously the risk is, as you say, that that fire changes direction and comes back to where we are. So our priorities remain the same, but obviously it's an increased risk because where we have set up and where we have put a lot of effort to trying to defend houses, potentially areas we're going to have to leave, and new areas will become in focus. And it's the same, obviously, with people in those places. They may think that the fire's passed over, but you have to realise that a wind change could well send the fire back to areas that have previously looked like they've survived or look like they have been quite safe to put yourself. So that's the problem. But really, for us, the whole risk of the whole effort that we're undertaking remains warnings, keeping people out of the way, property protection second. Still no action on actually tackling the fire down in the bush. Obviously, far too dangerous and far too large to be doing that.
Thank you, Andrew. And Adam, something the same, similar for fire and rescue?
Absolutely. We're fighting a fire of this size is a combined effort of both fire services, and more than likely fire of this size would get to what's known as a Section 44 and be declared. So it would have a state appointed incident controller, and effectively they work with both fire services. So it's someone from one of the two fire services, and they coordinate all the resources. So it's effectively, we work together as one.
Right. Thank you, Adam. Okay, so you can see how unpredictable these fires can be, and how they can attack certain areas much more quickly than would have normally been thought of, perhaps in the past. And Mark makes the good point on the chat there that if you've had a hazard reduction burn, even very recently, when you get this scale of event and this intensity of fire, those hazard reduction burns aren't going to make a lot of difference to the way this fire progresses. So don't make the big mistake of thinking, oh, there's been an HR burn in our area, therefore we don't have to worry. That's not the case in these big, intense events. In smaller events, they're more effective, but not in something of this scale. So just to finish off with, we'll leave the fire. The last thing we look at in Clownwise communities is how well you and your neighbours have planned for an event like this. And it also gives you a few ideas of how you can work with your neighbours, about how you might work cooperatively to make sure everybody is well informed and leaving early, and that their properties are in a reasonable condition for an oncoming event. And the reason that we want our neighbours' properties to be in good condition is that we know from events in Canberra in particular that when one house ignites, it then can transfer the fire to neighbouring houses. And so houses in the Canberra fire in 2003 that were kilometres from the bushfire itself, the embers were igniting a house, and then that house became fully involved in fire and ignited neighbouring houses. And so you got this patch of destruction right in the middle of suburbia, away from the bushland. So it's also a mistake that people think they're safe because they're not on the interface. That very much is not the case. Do you want to say anything to that, Adam or Andrew?
Yeah, absolutely correct. If we go outside and we have a nice little campfire, we stand around it to get warm. Depending on the intensity of that fire, you may need to sit further back, but we can move when we sit around that fire. If we have a house fire, the house next door can't move, and the warmer that gets, the more chance the radiant heat heats that neighbouring house up, and then it gets to its to a point where it will ignite.
Yeah, thanks, Adam. Okay, so just scrolling down through this section, again, it's a series of questions about how well you know your neighbours, whether you've discussed your bushfire plan with them. It looks at also alternatives for exit routes. So you might have an exit route planned for, but of course, if something happens, a tree comes down or there's some reason why you can't get out that way, you need to have alternatives for you to utilise so that you can know what to do if that situation occurs. And working with your neighbours is quite a useful way of helping come up with these alternatives beforehand. You know, the more people that think about these things, the better. So we work through the neighbourhood one, and again, it gives you lots of materials that you can work with through your neighbours. Around pets, for example, we do a lot of planning for pets because a lot of people have lost their lives trying to go back and rescue pets. And in the case where you're not home, which is very highly likely that you might not be home when the event unfolds, that your neighbours might be able to help retrieve your animals out of the danger zone. So that's part of the benefit. It could be your kids are at home alone, etc. So good working relationships with neighbours in the planning process has a lot of benefit. So again, we encourage you to work your way through that and to discuss your plans with your neighbours and of course your own household so that everybody's on the same page and well prepared. The very last tool we give you within this process is a what if tool. Now this came out of that research by the Bushfire CRC and RMIT, talking to people after Black Saturday, the few that did have a bushfire survival plan, and that was less than 5% of the people impacted, talking to them about whether their bushfire survival plan was effective. And almost universally they said no. And the reason why was because the fire didn't happen the way they thought it was going to happen. And so their bushfire plan had no contingency in it for if their plan A didn't work. So what this wheel is, it contains a whole lot of issues that happened in Black Saturday that you can test your plan to see if it addresses. So I'll just get James to spin the wheel and it'll land on one of these contingencies. And then you can see whether or not your plan could deal with that. So the phone and the internet are down. So how are you going to monitor what's going on? How are you going to get the warnings? What are you going to do in terms of talking to neighbours, etc., if there's no phone or internet? So that's a contingency that you can plan for. Leaving it until the event almost guarantees your plan will fail. That's why we need to do these things in advance and be well informed. You want a written plan that you can refresh your memory reasonably frequently so that it's front of mind as soon as you need it. Now you can spin that wheel as many times as you like, and you can come up with all those different issues, and you might think of a few more that potentially could occur. So it's quite a useful tool. Lots of people used it during Black Summer, not just people in Ku-ring-gai, but all over Australia actually logged on just to use this wheel. Okay, so bearing in time the hour and the time.
Sorry, Jenny, can I just make a comment there?
Yes.
The messaging has been for many years in regard to the contingencies is that if you make a plan and your plan is to leave early, sometimes a fire will start, such as that one that James created this evening, and you may not know what's happening, or you may get a message and it's too late for you to leave. So you have to have other contingencies within your plan that if that road's blocked and you can't get out, how are you going to do things? As well as, so on the perfect scenario, you choose to leave, but if things come up and you can't leave, how are you going to manage? The neighbourhood safer places, which we've mentioned this evening, are a place of last resort. They generally don't have toilet facilities. They're only for people. They're not for you to take your pets, because there could be multiple people there, and unfortunately we don't need pets that are fighting, such as dogs, etc., cats, etc. And it's something that everybody needs to know, that they are a place of last resort. So if your road out is blocked, you can go to that point within your local area that's nominated for neighbourhood safer place or place of last resort, but it's not for you to take your pets to. And there is limited facilities, if any, at these locations. So you need to have many contingencies in your plan on how you're going to manage under the certain circumstances. So that spinning wheel is something that is very beneficial, but in your own plan, you also need to have a number of different contingencies as to what happens on a Tuesday, which is what the scenario is this evening, and most of the family are at school or at work, and only one of you is left at home, are all out. We live in hope that your house was prepared, and by some miracle, some houses get saved and some houses don't, unfortunately. But depending on the day of the week as to the family's movements, and sometimes you make a plan that everyone's at home, it may not happen on a day when everyone's at home. So everyone has to have effectively multiple plans within their one plan.
Great. Thank you, Adam. Yes, that's something we haven't mentioned. What do you do if you are caught at home and you are forced to shelter in place? And that question comes up quite often. And I might ask Andrew, would you like to add to that question, the answer to that question?
Yep, sure. Well, it depends how much time you've got, obviously, but structures obviously are very effective at saving people. You're keeping away from the radiant heat if you're inside, and it's far better to be in a house or some other sort of building than it is to be in a car on a road trying to escape a fire at the last minute. Houses Obviously, there'll be an end that the fire's approaching from. So the idea is stay down the other end of the house, away from the end the fire would impact if it did. But it's essential that you keep out of the radiant heat. And as I say, remaining in place, sheltering in place in a structure is going to be ideal to try and achieve that. Fire front, is not going to take too long to pass over. Once it does, obviously, then you need to turn attention to embers that are dropping and trying to deal with those little fires that may come from those ember drops, and that's when houses do catch fire themselves. So it's really a case of you go and shelter, protect yourself from the fire in a structure, and then once the fire's passed over pretty quickly, you can emerge from that and start to deal with some of the embers that are landing around you. But it is important, if you've got a little bit of time, try and clear as much as you can around the house. Close doors and windows and curtains and shelter down at the end of the house, which is away from where the fire is coming from.
Right. Thank you, Andrew. Okay, so that's pretty comprehensive cook's tour of bushfire preparation. James, you might want to mention the rebates.
Yes, thank you very much, Jenny, for the intro, for the segue into that. Ku-ring-gai Council does offer residents a rebate to help them make their homes more resilient to bushfire. Naturally, won't no, as was discussed, no house, no matter how well prepared, is bushfire proof, especially if conditions reach the catastrophic levels. But having said that, there's a lot that residents can do to make their home much more resilient to bushfire, especially ember attack, which is the leading cause of houses burning down during a bushfire. So I'll share my screen to show you the rebate program. So the rebate program offers residents, Ku-ring-gai residents, a maximum of $1,500 to retrofit their homes to make it more resilient to bushfire. So how this works out is that council will issue will cover the cost of 25% of retrofit costs to a maximum of $1,000 for the actual work done. However, if your retrofit work requires a DA or a CDC, typically that applies to installing new windows or a new front door, existing windows, an existing sort of front door, that will typically require a CDC or a DA as the house is on bushfire prone land. So to help residents deal with those additional costs, we can offer a rebate of 50% of those costs to a maximum of $500. So in total, the maximum rebate you can achieve is $1,500. The kind of work you can get a rebate for is listed here on a council webpage, which you can find by searching Bushfire-wise rebate Ku-ring-gai Council, and the Google link should take you straight to this page. If not, you can go onto the Ku-ring-gai Council website and search Bushfire-wise rebates, and again you will get a link that can take you directly to this webpage. So the work that you can claim for includes work on the roof, such as replacing ridge cap mortar, installing fire-rated sarking in the roof, installing sprinkler systems, replacing skylights with toughened glass and sealed skylights that are sealed with combustible lining, roof vents. And without going through the entire list, there's a bit there. There are very popular ones are gutter guards or again skylights. Windows are a very weak point within a house, so we recommend you take advantage of the rebate to perhaps replace your windows. And external doors and garages are also an issue. Decking as well. If you have a treated pine deck, you would be well advised to perhaps replace that with something less combustible. And again, the rebate can help you out with that. There is a rebate, or you can get use a rebate for a rainwater tank to help you with firefighting. However, we also offer a rainwater tank rebate as part of the Water Smart rebate program. So you can always contact me via the council website to find out which rebate is most appropriate to you. And again, we offer rebates for installing rain gardens as well, which I believe can be a low flammable form of landscaping as well. Again, we offer rebates via the Water Smart Rebate Program for rain gardens. So please contact me and find out if that is of interest to you, and I can find the best rebate for you. To apply for the rebate, it involves essentially a two-step process. It involves a pre-approval application step and a final claim application step. The first step, the pre-approval, requires a completed bushfire survival plan, which you can download from the RFS website. The link is on this webpage here, in case you can't find it. Otherwise, just Googling New South Wales Rural Fire Service, and you should be able to get a link to a bushfire survival plan. The other document you need to include in your application is step 3 of the Ready Check. We covered that during tonight's presentation. So you go to the Climate-Wise Communities website, which is www.climatewisecommunities.com.au, and start the Ready Check and go to step 3 and complete that bushfire section. Save it to a PDF, which downloads it to your computer, and then include that in your pre-approval application. Once I get the application, I'll process it. I'll have a conversation with you and request in details such as specifications of the work you want to do and quotes which detail the work that you want to do. I'll issue you a pre-approval or have a discussion on how to improve your proposed work. And then once you've completed the work, you will send your final application through along with quotes, invoices and receipts for the work done, and then I'll issue you the rebate for the appropriate amount up to a maximum of $1,500 if that works out to be the case. So that's it for the Bushfire-Wise rebate, and I believe now, unless there's something else anyone wants to mention, we can launch into the Q&A session. So is everyone okay to start taking questions from the audience? Okay, I'll take that as a yes. So before we go to the Q&A box, I believe there's some questions listed in the chat. So we'll tick off those ones first. However, if you do have other questions, please put them in the Q&A box. It helps us, it makes it easier for us to manage those. So the first question here was, are we expecting bad fires this year, or are we just getting better prepared just in case? So first and best dressed for the answer to this question.
I can give a view. From our pre-season briefing only a couple of weeks ago, the rainfall in Sydney over the summer is expected to be higher than average. However, it's fair to say that the fuel loading in the bushland in our part of the North Shore, and that Hornsby and Ku-ring-gai district is very high, and so no one should be complacent just because I said that it might be wetter than average in terms of rainfall. So can't give a guarantee either way, but that's the reality, and that's the position that we're working towards.
So Mark, following up on that question, how many days, and Adam, please chime in, or Mark chime in on this one. How many days of very dry, hot weather would say you have a period of rain and you think everything's moist and wet? How much dry, hot weather would it take before we reach conditions where we could experience a very severe and dangerous bushfire?
Often on the tops of the ridges or the tops of the slopes, a strong westerly, northwesterly wind will dry it out pretty quickly. Within a week, we've found a week to 2 weeks, it will certainly carry a fire. But if you have drought conditions over many, many months, and I've seen droughts where I come from last years, everything is tinder dry and a fire will just carry so quickly. It's not funny. So yeah, the more drying you get, the more volatile the fuel gets. True. Okay. Thanks.
Okay, so the next question is...
Not only that, James, a very high fire danger, the fires can nominally, we can throw resources at it to control them, but as we tip further up the scale, it becomes very difficult to manage and control the fire. So on an extreme day, definitely in a catastrophic day, but you've just got to be able to sail dry weather. We could have a decent fire within the district for many, many years, yes, but the whole area, we've been very fortunate. I mean, I live across the ditch in the Northern Beaches Council area, and 94 was our last major fire, whereas 79 started over in the Ku-ring-gai area and came across to the Northern Beaches. But, and Andrew can quantify and clarify this, but we haven't had a serious fire in some of those areas for 20 plus years.
Yep, that's right, and that's despite hazard reduction and other stuff, that's what is contributing to the very high fuel load. So the amount of fuel in the bush that we have in the district at the moment. So it's just a matter of being aware of that. And as you've heard, it doesn't take that long to for the bush to dry out. Only a few days or a good week or two of that really dry wind. And to Adam's point, we probably missed a bit of that, but there are 6 levels of fire danger. Starting off at the bottom, you got low, moderate, then high, but very high is the fourth one down. But fire on those sorts of days can do quite a lot of damage, and obviously the 3 other levels of rating above that, right up to catastrophic. During summer, any fire in any of those conditions, very high and above, is something to be wary of.
Okay, great. So there's a very quick one. I think there is talk of building an RFS station in East Killara. So that's I think there's a question about that one.
Yes. Yes, well, I hope that happens, because that's the brigade I'm the captain of. And we did set up the Killara Rural Fire Brigade 3 years ago. It is a proper standalone Rural Fire Brigade. We've got 50 members, 2 trucks. The only thing we don't have is the station. It is earmarked to be built in Cooler Avenue. At the moment, where the Killara Brigade is based with the Ku-ring-gai Brigade up in North Wahroonga. But quite right, that is the absolute plan, to have a Killara Brigade stationed in the East Killara area as soon as we can. Great.
Thanks, Andrew. Okay, so I'll go over to the questions in the Q&A box. And we have a question here. The question is, what's the update with the plan to build... Oh, that's the same question. It has been answered. Okay. Are the Killara RFS still looking for volunteers? If so, how to go about it?
Yes, the RFS has just launched a new electronic membership process. So the best thing to do is to go to the RFS website and click on the various links about volunteering, joining as a member, as a volunteer member, and follow the process from there. Up until about a month ago, it was all a matter of phoning people up, getting a paper form and filling it in. But now you can access all that from the website, and that'll electronically come through to the membership group at our brigade. And there are 16 other brigades in the Hornsby Ku-ring-gai district, which is run as a combined district, and then the Northern Beaches is run as another district. There's probably another 20 brigades over there. So somewhere in that group, there'll be brigades looking for people. But in the first instance, the forms will sort of come through to the area that you live in or that you nominate on that form, and it'll direct through to the relevant brigade. So that's the process. Yes, always happy to receive applications.
Okay, we have another question. Would Cooler Oval be a good place to go as a last resort? I think that relates to the safer places designation. Location. So is Cooler Oval
the neighbourhood safer places will all be listed on the council website. In the absence of one of those, a clear area like that is better than a lot of other places. So it is always a last resort. Obviously, the whole idea of this presentation is to try and avoid, through preparedness and planning, try and avoid being caught out at the last minute somewhere where you don't want to be. So neighbourhood safer places are worth knowing, and as I say, they're all on the council website. But a large area of cleared ground like a park is not so bad either if worst comes to the worst.
And I can imagine it wouldn't necessarily be a very comfortable place to take shelter, because I suppose you'd still be having issues of embers landing from the sky on top of your head, and the heat and the smoke. So I guess when people mention safer places, it's literally, it would have to be safer than where you were, I'd imagine. So I wouldn't want to necessarily be at a safer place. If I had to be in a safer place, something, my plan's gone pretty badly, I'd imagine. Cool. So any other questions for our presenters? Well, there is actually one other question. This guess relates, it's not strictly it is related to bushfire, I suppose. The question is, will council permit removal of pine trees? Now, Mark, you can answer that one, I believe. You know more about trees than myself.
I suppose an individual tree, if it was a fir pine that's nearly dead, I presume council would allow it to go, particularly if it's a foreign species, not sort of provenance to the area, certainly. But then again, if it's just an individual tree on bushfire grounds, it may not, I'd probably come and inspect it. I've got a list of about 200 trees I should be seeing. I can't get out to see them. I have to do burn plans at the moment. So yeah, it would be on the list to be assessed. But if it's just an individual tree, probably not for bushfire, unless it's overhanging your back fence very badly and spreading all sorts of issues. So yeah, we'd have to assess it. Council has a tree team. If the word bushfire gets up, it gets sent to me, but I've got so much work, it's not funny, truly. Thanks.
Yep. Okay, thank you, Mark. Question from Talia Lowe. Would Killara High School be a safer place to go? Well, if it's not listed, if it's not listed on the council website as a safer place to go to, I probably wouldn't necessarily go to the school. Because I believe the school would have to be opened to begin with, and I don't think so. If it's not listed as a safer place, I probably would not go there. Any comment, Adam, Andrew?
I think.
Look, none after you, Andrew.
I was just going to say, if there are schools, childcare centres that are open on a day that a fire does take hold, generally the fire brigades are aware that there's large numbers of people in those sorts of places. Obviously, we make every effort to get a fire truck to those locations, knowing that there are a lot of people in those sort of facilities. So if that's the scenario, then obviously that would make sense to stay there. In terms of the school, well, it's generally if it's a reasonably well built up area, no sort of risk of bush and whatnot. If you were worried about being out anywhere else, then that sort of built up or open ground is a reasonable option to take. But in general, if it's not one of the listed neighbourhood safer places, it's not going to be open. So if there's a fire that does take hold in that area in the weekend, yes, there's worse places to go. But I think the reality is, if you're talking about a day where the school is open versus a day where, say, the school isn't, the days when it's not open, there's not going to be any great number of people there. There's not going to be anywhere to shelter inside. So I think the best thing to do is to look at where the neighbourhood safer places are and make sure you're aware of those and have a good idea as to how you're going to get to them.
Okay, great. Thanks, Andrew.
And just further to that, James, the schools will be enacting their own bushfire survival plans. So they'll be putting all the students into the hall or something like that. With current restrictions, and that may change, but no, they're not going to, they shouldn't turn you away, but they're unlikely in the current environment with and I'm not 100% sure what the high school fence is, but if it's got the big tall fence around it, most of the time it'll be closed. And there'll also be a whole lot of parents trying to get there to get to their kids. So the high school may not be the right location for you to head to. So the neighbourhood safer places will be the right place to go to.
And that's a very good point, actually. Parents coming to collect their children in case there's a bushfire in the area. The amount of traffic on the roads would be quite phenomenal. So it's bad enough on a normal school day, trying to get to work through and navigating the drop-off and pickups of children outside schools. Just imagine what it'd be like if every parent is rushing back to collect their children if there's a bushfire threatening and you're trying to get through yourself. So we have a question from John. John, is the ABC 702? That's the local frequency for the emergency broadcaster, the ABC. Is there any other frequencies that emergency information is broadcast on?
Oh, there may well be. Other radio stations may broadcast information, as do television stations. But the best thing to remember is that the ABC has an obligation to provide or to transmit all the emergency information, and that really, therefore, is the only place to listen to. As sort of not the level of guarantee, I guess, that other stations will have all the information that the ABC will. So that is the prime way of keeping up to date with what's going on in terms of radio stations. The RFS also has some channels that are available. The Fires Near Me app, other broadcasts from the RFS on Twitter and whatnot as well. Fires Near Me app, I definitely recommend, if you haven't already got it, to download that and to set your location on that so that you are notified through the app, via text, essentially, of fires that break out in that area that you've set as your area of interest. And the messaging that comes through with that will actually tell you sort of what the status is and give you a good idea as to when it is the right time to enact your bushfire survival plan.
Great. And as bushfires typically happen over the summer period, a lot of people go on holidays. Does the emergency frequency from the ABC change based on where you are? Is it always going to be 702, or do you, wherever you go on your holiday, do you have to figure out what the local frequency is for the ABC?
Yeah, 702 is just the ABC local radio in Sydney. There are other equivalent stations, quite a number of them throughout the state. So there'll be a different one in, say, Newcastle, a different one in Wollongong, and all other parts of the state. They will have their own different local radio stations. So it will be a matter of knowing what they are. But certainly in Sydney, it is just in the greater Sydney area, it is that 702. Great.
So bushfire planning isn't just for when you're at home, it's also when you're on holiday. You have to get your information. Great. Thank you for that. Okay, last question is, with an eye on the time, it's 8:45, so a little bit over time here. So thank you very much, everyone, for hanging around, and the presenters for staying a little bit later. One last question, and before we wrap up. And this, Mark, it's about invasive species, clearing invasive species from council lands to improve bushfire preparedness. I take it that relates to just taking the initiative to clear invasive species.
Yeah, actually, no one likes invasive species, whether it be lantana or bamboo or whatever. And so for biodiversity purposes, council certainly doesn't like it. And the funny thing is, people think lantana is pretty flammable. At times it is, other times it's not. It's quite a weird species, so to speak. And sometimes pesticide can be, or herbicide can be used, and then burnt. But actually in burn programs there's special arrangements to deal with weed issues. So having a medium or hotter burn can often destroy weeds, but then you have to have follow-up to ensure the seeding doesn't come back up again, regenerate. So yeah, weeds are a special case.
So I think maybe joining a local bush care group, or maybe even talking to our bush care volunteer coordinator to maybe form a group in your local area to manage the weeds in your local area might be a good way of going about it, because just going ahead clearing weeds on council land without the appropriate training or supervision could land yourself in a bit of hot water, and it's best done with the help and resources of our very friendly bushfire volunteer team.
And we often have pile burns as well on smoke. We'll pull out the weeds, the regen team will pull out the weeds, and then our fire team will go and have a pile burn. So we do all the legislative side of that.
To close off the workshop and answer that question, by all means contact council and they can direct you to the right person to maybe address that issue. So thank you very much, everyone that's stuck around to the very end for this presentation. I'd like to also mention that there is a native beehive prize draw on the 29th of November. So everyone who attended the workshop will be eligible for that prize draw. And if you win, I will contact you and we can arrange a delivery of your beautiful bees, your native bees. They're stingless. They won't bite you or sting you or harass you. My 17-month-old child loves them, and they fly on them and land on his hair and everything. They're the best pets ever.
And it's beautiful with ice cream. Really lovely. Yes.
Oh, the bees or the honey?
No, the honey.
The honey. Okay, great. Thanks for clarifying that, Mark. Okay, I was getting a bit worried about you. Okay, so again, thank you very much. Again, Adam, Andrew, Jenny, and Mark for coming along. My name is James Chan. I didn't mention that at the start, but now you know my name. And any questions, please send them into council. And send questions. You can also send questions via the Ask an Expert function of the Clownwise Community's website. So those emails come to me, and we can also send your questions to any of the experts we had presented tonight, as well as experts such as Bushfire researchers from the CSIRO, Bushfire Building Council, you name it, we've got people. So thank you very much for your time and stay safe this summer. Bye.